Top 10 waiver wire stashes ahead of week 12. I cannot believe we are at week 12 and we are back on the bye week struggles with 4 teams on a bye this week. Denver, Los Angeles, Miami, and Washington. And we've got some fresh names on the waiver wire stash list this week. Kind of fun here. So you know the drill. As always, our goal here is to get ahead of the game and get a jump on your league mates. We are predicting who could be the top waiver wire ads on Tuesday, and we are snagging them now for free so that you don't have to spend your fab or waiver wire priority to get them. Let's beat the waiver wire together. Week 10 was the breakout game for Jayden Higgins with 5 receptions on 7 targets for 42 yards and a touchdown. And this is exactly what we needed to see from him. We saw him do well earlier without Nico Collins in a game, but we needed to see him do well in tandem with Nico Collins. That was the key. Nico dominated in target share. He had 7 receptions on 15 targets for over 100 yards. And meanwhile, Xavier Hutchinson did not see a single target. So perhaps Jayden Higgins is really asserting himself here as the clear wide receiver 2. Houston's win keeps them in the playoff mix, and this offense might just be undergoing a subtle little shift here in adjustments to stay competitive. My hesitation with Higgins has always been the Texans' tendency to lean on Hutchinson. They seem to have some favoritism to him, but this particular matchup might be the beginning of a change in preference. Higgins looked good, and it is very possible that we are witnessing a shift in the depth chart. It's also worth noting that this was an extremely heavy pass volume outing for the Texans offense. Davis Mills threw 45 times, which would rank second as the second highest pass attempt total of the season, even including the games with CJ Stroud. Because of that, it is important to note that we should not assume this level of volume in general for the Texans offense every single week. Still, though, the schedule sets up moving forward very well here, and especially this week with a very favorable matchup against Tennessee on deck here. We've got Davis Mills at quarterback again, so perhaps another strong performance here from Higgins, since it is not uncommon for backups to have a better connection with the lower end receivers, since that is who they're often throwing to in practice. Regardless, though, if Higgins keeps looking sharp here, he could just bully Hutchinson out of the way here. Being early on Higgins is the right move, especially with a very talented rookie here. And while you're watching this group, again, reminder, do keep your eye on Jalen Noel. With Marvin Harrison Jr. out this week and a good chance of missing next week, you do need to look at Michael Wilson as a potential stash and flex option while Harrison is out. The Cardinals' receiving core is scraped down to nothing. Not only is Marvin Harrison Jr. out, but the Cardinals also put Zay Jones on IR, and now their receiving core consists of Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch. Obviously, we know that the bulk of the targets are going to Trey McBride here. He is more than likely going to have a fantastic day. But considering that Jacoby Brissett has thrown the ball a minimum of 31 times, and it is highly unlikely that Trey McBride gets 31 targets, someone else has to step up as the pass catcher here. In the high-risk starts video, we did talk about the potential increase here in volume, receiving volume for Amari DiMercato. But if you have to look at the Cardinals receiving core, and you should look at someone, the safest bet is Michael Wilson. Now, Greg Dortch, I like him. He has shown promise before. Make no mistake on that. Not trying to downplay the man that bad. There have been fun times in streaming Greg Dortch in the past, and he has come through. But Dortch has been very uninvolved in the offense thus far in the season, and Wilson has been the one that has been the most present on the field, with upwards of 60 to 90% of snaps in every single game this season. Wilson also profiles as more of a direct replacement for Marvin Harrison Jr. While he has spent 40% of his time in the slot this season, he is well capable of playing on the outside, and from a size perspective, he is very similar to Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr.'s numbers have been highly disappointing from a fantasy perspective in terms of consistency this season, even with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. But a lot of that was on Marvin Harrison Jr. and his inconvenient drops. If Wilson can handle just half the volume that Marvin Harrison Jr. was getting, he could have legitimate wide receiver 2 upside here. And next week, the Cardinals have an excellent matchup against a very friendly Jacksonville defense. We talked about this in the waiver wire video. I don't like it, but unfortunately, Pete Carroll's loyalty is showing through here with Tyler Lockett. He saw a significant increase in usage in week 10. He had 5 receptions on 6 targets for 44 yards. That's nothing special, but it did come in a difficult matchup against a strong Denver defense. This week, the Raiders face Dallas. Now, to their credit, Dallas, their defense has been retooled. We still need to see, like on the field, how these pieces all mesh together. But technically speaking, Tyler Lockett is a streaming option and could have a high upside game in this matchup here. So we need to jump on it as a potential stash here. The Jacoby Myers trade, we talked about it. It should have benefited everyone but Tyler Lockett, but unfortunately it did not. Ultimately, Brock Bowers is the first read in this offense, even if it didn't happen last week. But Lockett could easily become a focal point of this passing game, and Pete Carroll clearly trusts him here. Again, it's difficult to gauge just how much this Dallas defense will change as a matchup here. So in theory, it is a good matchup here where the Raiders should push heavy pass volume. And even if the Dallas defense has improved, the Cowboys offense should come out very strong here after the bye week. So this should be a very high volume game in general. Lockett clearly has a very specific role, and he could easily be the top waiver wire ad this week. We talked about Michael Wilson, but what about his quarterback? Now, with Marvin Harrison Jr. out this week, fantasy managers might be a little bit weary of pivoting to Jacoby Brissett, but he is still very much in play this week and an excellent stash candidate. I stand on business on that one. The loss of Marvin Harrison Jr. won't have that big of a significant impact on his production. I know that sounds crazy, but the vast majority of Brissett's production and volume has gone to Trey McBride, who has 6 touchdowns in 4 games with Brissett starting. Brissett has finished as a top 12 quarterback in all 4 of his starts this season. And we should note that 2 of those games were games where Marvin Harrison Jr. had less than 8 fantasy points. So he isn't necessary for Brissett to have a top 12 game. So while Brissett is definitely more of a risky start with Marvin Harrison Jr. out, not so much to the extent that we need to ignore the fact that he has been on fire and he has a locked in job for what looks like the remainder of our fantasy season. Kyler Murray was placed on IR. Brissett is the starter, and based on the team's timeline here, that will continue through the fantasy season here. So these QB1s, obviously performances for him have come against Indianapolis, Green Bay, Dallas, Seattle, a good mix of matchups there. So we look positively in terms of what he's done. He's thrown between 30 to 44 times a game here. He is mobile. He's adding rushing upside here. And their remaining schedule isn't that bad. I would consider it slightly above average. The only matchup that I don't like is week 15 against Houston, but week 17, Cincinnati, championship week, you gotta love it. We talked about Christian Watson in the start sit video, and that is exactly why we want to stash him. This game profiles as a game where he could go off, and with the reputation that he has for streaky performances, he would definitely jump right up to the top of waiver wire lists. And that makes him a critical stash because I absolutely do not want to spend any fab on him. I'm cool with rostering him, but I don't want to spend fab on him because Jayden Reed is lurking in the shadows. And while we don't know exactly when he returns, he will return at some point, and I have no doubt that he will have the highest upside in the receiving core when he is back. Watson's return hasn't been special, but I do think that he was eased in, so I give him a little bit of pass on that. We did finally see his snap count jump last week, so we can assume that he's now back to a more regular workload than he had in the first 2 games here. And his performance last week against Philadelphia, very excusable. Bad matchup. Jordan Love was awful. But this week's game profiles as a big Jordan Love game. Jordan Love has had multiple high upside, high volume games, and those games have come against teams like Washington, Dallas, and Pittsburgh. The Giants fit into that very specific category here, so this should be a good day. We're also expecting more pass volume from the Giants with our boy Jameis Winston at the helm here. This could really be an excellent breakout opportunity here for Watson. Keon Coleman has been incredibly disappointing since the first week where he had that massive breakout game with 8 receptions on 11 targets for 112 yards and a touchdown. Since then, he's failed to have more than 4 receptions in a game. So when he does occasionally get those touchdowns, and they do come, it is still mediocre fantasy points for us. But last week was his second best performance of the season to his credit, just 3 receptions, but he did get 8 targets and he got the touchdown. And it stands to reason that he could see additional volume this week with Dalton Kincaid out. Now, obviously, the direct replacement for Kincaid is Dawson Knox, but it's been an extremely long time since we have seen Knox used in any high volume capacity, and Kincaid is not the typical tight end. Josh Allen loves to target him downfield because he is an athletic receiving option who can be used that way. So if the Bills are looking to replace some of that downfield work, the logical solution here is to pivot to Keon Coleman as a deep threat. And at this point, we do have enough evidence to say that when Kincaid goes out, Coleman does see a bump in snaps and targets. Kincaid's injury is a hamstring injury. We know that those are often multi-week injuries, and Tampa Bay is a matchup that should encourage pass volume. So Coleman could have a big day here and become a very flashy waiver wire ad. We do not love the matchup next week against Houston, but if the injury to Kincaid is extended, after Houston, the Bills get Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. We have obviously talked about Tyjae Spears ad nauseum at this point, but he is still below 40% rostered because he is coming off a bye, and if you had to drop somebody, a Titans running back does make logical sense. But Spears has been incredibly reliable in terms of having a solid floor this season. Obviously, he missed the first 4 games of the season, and we do not count week 5 towards his fantasy production really when evaluating him because he was worked back, obviously, in that game and only played 25% of snaps. That's not a normal workload for him. But after that, he had 9 fantasy points, 7 fantasy points, 17 fantasy points, and 9 fantasy points again. And all of those matchups were against above average run defenses. And the 7 fantasy point game came against New England, who has been notoriously difficult against the run this year. So he has been relatively good when you put in that perspective. This week's matchup against Houston is unfortunately another difficult run matchup, but we do not like Spears for his usage on the ground. It is the receiving upside that gives him that solid floor. He has had a minimum of 3 receptions in all of the games where he's played in his full workload this season, and that alone in PPR gives him a solid floor of around 9 fantasy points. With the unreliable running backs that are floating all around the league, you can do a lot worse than Tyjae Spears. He and Pollard are used very interchangeably here. He is a solid stash. The Titans, unfortunately, do have one of the most difficult remaining schedules in terms of defensive matchups. But again, that does present a good opportunity for receiving volume for Spears while playing from behind. All right, deep fantasy truthers, get in here. Now's your time. Is it actually time for Keaton Mitchell to finally shine? I told you it was going to be fun here. Yeah, Keaton Mitchell. We're going to talk about it here. Honestly, I did not think at any point I would be able to talk about Keaton Mitchell, but Justice Hill has been ruled out, and he actually does have a significant role in this offense. Derrick Henry only plays a certain amount of snaps because there are certain limitations to his game. We know that. Those limitations are that he mainly works on the ground. That makes a change of pace back with receiving capabilities very critical in this Ravens offense, and that role has belonged to Justice Hill. With Justice Hill out, that presents a very interesting opportunity for Keaton Mitchell here, particularly in a matchup against Cleveland where in the week 2 game between Cleveland and Baltimore, Derrick Henry had 11 carries for 23 yards. We know that Mitchell is talented, but he has never been able to carve out a significant role in his very young career, as Justice Hill has had a stranglehold on that role. But if Mitchell gets the opportunity to shine here, we know that he can pop, and by pop, I mean specifically he can pop off a big run or 2. He is a home run hitter, and he has been able to have big fantasy days in the past off of extremely limited touches. Mitchell is a fantasy football cult favorite, so if he has a good game, I guarantee you people will be running to the waiver wires to grab him. Now, this one is a fun one here. I guess it depends on your definition of fun. Yeah, J.K. Dobbins is dealing with an injury. We do not have a specific timeline on him, but the wording is that he is out for the foreseeable future. Translation, with a serious foot injury means that more than likely done for our fantasy season, unfortunately, which sucks because he was having a really good season, and I love J.K. Dobbins, and I wish nothing but the best for him, but apparently it's happening again, and we've got to move on, unfortunately, here. We've talked a ton about RJ Harvey, naturally, right? And we expect him to step in and operate as the lead back, so this is no negative towards him, right? While he has only cracked double-digit carries once this season in Week 4 against Cincinnati, he has developed a very critical role as a key receiving option and clear red zone preference over J.K. Dobbins. And again, that is alongside J.K. Dobbins at the same time. So the fact that he garnered that level of trust from Sean Payton to the point where he is getting that preferential treatment in the red zone over a player like J.K. Dobbins is extremely impressive and encouraging. So I do feel very comfortable with RJ Harvey. This is no negative towards him whatsoever, but we do have to wonder just how much workload he will actually handle. Sean Payton does typically use 3 backs, so it would be a little silly for us to expect that RJ Harvey is going to go out there getting upwards of 20 carries every single game moving forward. which would factually be the combined total of the workload that Dobbins had typically seen, along with the carries that Harvey was seeing, plus Harvey's receiving volume. That is a lot there, so it stands to reason that we should see an uptick in usage from Tyler Badie. I would not expect a significant contribution on the ground, but he has been utilized a decent amount from a receiving perspective, so keep your eye on this one. He would perhaps offer some standalone value in PPR if Dobbins is out rest of season. Brenton Strange has been ruled out for week 11, but he did practice this week and he was officially designated to return from IR, so more than likely he's going to make his debut in week 12 against Arizona. We have talked a ton about the receiving options for Jacksonville over the past couple of weeks here, and Strange is actually a pretty important stash rest of season here. Strange only played in 4 games before getting injured, but he was fairly successful in those 4 games, and that was with a fully healthy Jags receiving core. In those 4 games, he had 1 dud game against Cincinnati of all teams, but Cincinnati. And in the other 3 games, he scored between 9 and 12 fantasy points. It's not much, but he is definitely the unquestioned tight end 1 for the Jags. So when he returns, he should see a very high snap count and a very solid amount of targets. You could do a lot worse. And the rest of season schedule, it is not pretty for the Jags, but oddly enough, it is very favorable for tight ends. In fact, he has one of the easiest rest of season schedules at tight end, so keep that in mind. And finally, friendly reminder to check your waiver wire to see if these guys that have been out for an extended period of time on IR are available. Jayden Reed, we talked about it with Christian Watson. When he comes back, arguably could be the wide receiver 1 there. We have seen him have a lot of success before in the past. And Brandon Aiyuk, of course. Again, this is a weird one here. And oddly enough, they do have a ton of competition there with George Kittle, Ricky Pearsall, Jawan Jennings as well. So there's a lot going on here. Brandon Aiyuk has never been a guy that has just had a massive amount of volume like a CeeDee Lamb. He's a guy that has thrived off of touchdowns, so he doesn't need a ton of targets in order to be fantasy relevant. So if he's out there, check. It is about that time where we should start stashing him just in case. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. You can find me across all social media platforms at It's Sarah Time, so make sure that you are tuned in, subscribe, follow, notifications on, all that good stuff, because I'm bringing you more fantasy football content all season long and in the off season too. Don't forget about that. We're not going away here. So make sure that you are subscribed and tuned in for waiver wire stashes, live shows, all that good stuff, and so much more.